How much world building does my fantasy novel need? My name is Gina. I'm an author, editor, publishing professional. I help you make your writing better. Just enough that the novel doesn't fall apart. And that is going to be different depending on your subgenre and then even the type of story that you are telling within that subgenre. Some fantasy fans want there to be a lot of hard and fast rules, particularly to a magic system. Others don't care so much. Some people are okay with you sort of like hand waving things away and being like, yeah, we've got magic and demons in this coffee shop and still also a Jeep somehow. I don't know what the Jeep runs on, but it's fine. Even in some of the worlds that need a lot of world building to make sense, it doesn't all necessarily need to be on the page. This is something that you can do mostly kind of behind the scenes, and it will be the structure that holds your story together and makes everything make sense. Because even if we don't explain it all clearly, there's nothing that contradicts the storyline. We recently finished watching the Lord of the Rings movies, and in the books, it's much more clear that the journey has taken a lot longer. But in the movies, they don't do anything to contradict that world building. The world building in the books is much, much more intense, and there's a lot more detail about how long it takes for them to get to Bree, for how long they spend in these different segments of the journey. Like, it's a lot more explicit. And in the movies, they didn't take the time to explain all of that. In fact, they mention riding times and like how many days they are. They mention that only a handful of times across the entire series, but they also don't do anything to contradict it. They don't go out of their way to explain it to the movie audience, who largely doesn't care, but they didn't do anything that contradicts it. They didn't come out and explicitly say, oh, we did this in 24 hours or we did this overnight. And in fact, if you pay attention, there are hints that this other world building is out there, that these details exist somewhere else. They just didn't explain it thoroughly, and they didn't contradict the world building that existed. And that's a lesson that you can take for your fantasy novel overall. You can do a lot of world building that stays off screen, stays off the page, but you know it's there. And because you know the reason why that Jeep runs on a certain type of power, you can write a story that doesn't contradict itself and doesn't confuse the reader. And that's really what most people are asking for when they're like, well, the world building was incomplete. It's not really that it was incomplete, it's that it was contradictory, or it didn't make sense. There were gaps in it. So you might need to do a lot more world building than what actually ends up on the page. And what ends up on the page is going to vary depending on your genre and your subgenre, which is why you need to read a lot within the space that you are planning to publish, because that way you can get a sense of what reader expectations are.